Midwives, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be another Mommy Monday video. If you're new to my channel, then my name is Melissa. Welcome, nice to meet you. I typically make beauty and makeup related videos, but when I got pregnant, I decided to start making pregnancy related videos, and now that I'm a mommy, I'm making mom videos. So this video is going to be all about my experience with a midwife versus an OB/GYN, which is a doctor. And I got a lot of questions about this. I had a lot of questions about this, so I figured it would be really interesting to film a video about it, to kind of tell you guys what my experience was like with a midwife in case you're pregnant and you're trying to decide, do I go to a midwife or do I go to a doctor? What is the difference? Does it even matter? And yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so to kind of preface this story for you guys, prior to being pregnant, I really didn't do a lot of research as far as what the difference between an OB/GYN was and a midwife. In my mind, I thought midwives were the people that came to your house and assisted with home deliveries. I never knew that they were in doctor's offices, that they delivered at hospitals. I just kind of assumed like the show Call the Midwife, which is based in like the 1950s. I just thought that's what midwives were. I didn't really associate them with the medical world. And I never really cared to do research about it. I didn't really have a need to because I'm, not in the medical industry myself, and I was never pregnant, and I just didn't really care. So when I got pregnant, I went to my standard OB, and I still kind of fumble with, so there's an OB/GYN, and then there's just a GYN. A gynecologist does just female, stuff, like your normal pap smears, that kind of stuff. And then an OB/GYN is a baby doctor. So I was going to just a GYN. She does not do baby care or pregnancy prenatal care. So she confirmed my pregnancy, but she wasn't able to assist with any kind of prenatal care. So she referred me to, she gave me a list of doctors to choose from to start receiving prenatal care. So I walked out of her office with a giant list of OB/GYN providers, and I had to figure out what my insurance covered, what hospital I wanted to deliver at, all of that kind of stuff, and go from there. So what I did at that point, I was like 6 weeks pregnant. I was nervous to tell anybody. I didn't want to tell my family and friends yet because, at that point you're so nervous, I don't know. Some people are excited and they want to tell everybody. I was nervous. So I did research. I went on Google reviews and Yelp and things like that to try to figure out what was the best hospital to deliver at. And that's how I decided what OB/GYN I was going to pick. I ended up caving and telling a coworker who was also pregnant. Now she was far enough along that she had already announced to everybody. She was showing everybody knew she was pregnant. So I confided in her. She was the first person I told, and I said, hey, I really need your help. I had moved to Charlotte, 2 years prior, a year and a half prior. I didn't even know where the nearest hospital was. I was very unfamiliar with the branding out here. She has lived here her whole life. So I asked her hey, I'm pregnant, yay, I need your help. What hospital do you recommend? Had I not had her, I probably would have picked a different hospital and I might have regretted it. So I'm glad I talked to at least somebody to kind of get a recommendation as far as what hospital was good. So she recommended a certain hospital, and from that point I looked at the list of doctors that delivered at that hospital and picked my OB/GYN provider that way. So I picked the one that had the best reviews and I called them to schedule my first appointment. So I called them and I said, hey, my doctor just confirmed I was pregnant. I need to start prenatal care. How soon can I see a doctor? And at that point I was told that all of the doctors were not seeing new patients and they were completely booked for 8 to 10 weeks or something like that. And I was like, oh my God, 8 to 10 weeks? You're kidding me. I can't wait that long to see a doctor. I just found out I'm pregnant. I need to start seeing a doctor right now. I need to know what to do. I don't know what to do. And so I kind of had a little bit of a breakdown on the phone with the scheduling lady. And she goes, well, we do have midwives also, and they're available right away. Do you want to go with a midwife? And I was like, what is a midwife? Like, I don't know. I don't want to have a home delivery. Like, I don't even know what that means. Like, no, I don't want to see a midwife. And she was like, okay, well, then you're going to have to wait 8 to 10 weeks. And so I hung up and I called a few more providers. And it was very common for OBGYNs to be booked out like weeks and weeks and weeks. So, and nobody else had offered the option of a midwife. So I called back the original provider and I was like, okay, I'll see a midwife. And so I had my first appointment with a midwife at 10 weeks, 8 weeks. I don't remember, to be honest. But at that point, I had asked the midwife in my appointment, like, what's the difference between you and a doctor? Can you please tell me, like, I want an epidural? That was the first thing in my mind, was like, oh my God, they're not gonna let me get an epidural. Midwives are so hokey, they're natural, like, they're not gonna let me have an epidural. They're gonna make me deliver in a tub of water. Like, I don't know. I didn't know what I was, you know. Anyways, so my appointment was at a doctor's office. It was at an OBGYN provider's office, just like you would if you're going to see a doctor. I waited in the same waiting room. I went to the same room, like patient rooms. Everything was the same as if you're going to see a doctor. They look the same. They're dressed the same. They wear the white coat. They are, essentially, you could never tell the difference between them and a doctor just by looking at them. So she walked into the room. We had my appointment, and essentially she explained to me that in that provider office, the midwives work very closely with the doctors. In fact, you could see both. So some people that see the doctors will switch off, and sometimes they'll see a midwife, sometimes they'll see a doctor, just depending on what their appointment is for. But midwives can do everything that doctors can do except for surgery. So midwives can still administer labs, prescribe medication. I mean, they can do every single thing that a doctor does for a pregnant person except for surgery. So if you need a C-section, or if you're high risk. So if you're a high risk pregnancy, which could be any number of things. If you have twins, you're typically high risk. If you're over 35, you're considered high risk. I mean, there's many things that can qualify you as high risk. But if you're high risk, you have to see a doctor, not a midwife. So midwives will typically take all of the low risk, standard, normal, non-surgical pregnancies. In my situation, I don't feel like I missed out on anything because I had a midwife instead of a doctor. I don't feel like I had any unanswered questions. I don't feel like I was forced into anything weird. I still feel like I had a normal prenatal experience. I don't have anything to compare to because I've never seen a doctor in that situation. But in my naive mind, everything was exactly the same. So I still had, you know, my standard every 4 weeks, then every 2 weeks, then every 1 week appointments. I still was able to get the genetic testing done at 10 weeks. I was able to do all the ultrasounds, all of that stuff. They still do cervical checks. They do all of that. Everything that I had expected, I was still able to have done. And I was still able to get an epidural during delivery because doctors do not administer epidurals, anesthesiologists administer epidurals. So, let's take a break, bud. Let's burp for a second. Which I also didn't know. So you can still get an epidural with a midwife. In fact, most people do if you deliver in a hospital. So anyways, so yeah, that was my experience as far as like overall. I don't feel like I missed out on anything. I still delivered in a hospital. I still had all my checkups at a doctor's office. Now some midwives will offer home deliveries. So some midwives still do that practice where they will come to your house and they will deliver your baby at your house for you. The midwives at my provider didn't offer that service, so it wasn't even an option. Not that I would have taken it if it was. They all deliver in hospitals. So they deliver in the same hospitals, in the same hospital rooms as the doctors. They have the same kind of procedures and protocols and standards as the doctors have. There isn't anything, again, that like completely makes them totally different than doctors. Now, some of the things that they recommend are a little bit different. So, for example, and I think this ties back to the fact that midwives typically will take on very low risk, standard, normal, nothing seems weird pregnancies. They trust in the female body. They trust the process. They trust that things are going to happen the way they're supposed to. Women have been giving birth literally forever. Women have been pregnant since the beginning of humankind. And so they just kind of trust the process. They trust that things are going to happen the way they're supposed to, that your body's going to do what it's supposed to do, that baby's going to do what they're supposed to do. So therefore, they will typically not do as many ultrasounds. They won't do as many unnecessary labs, treatments, things like that. They will only do things like that when they feel like it is absolutely direly necessary. So because of that, I only got 2 ultrasounds the entire time I was pregnant, which in some situations is normal, but I know people get ultrasounds much more frequently than that, and typically that is when you're seeing a doctor instead of a midwife. So a midwife will only call for things like that when it is absolutely necessary. Hi, baby. You sleepy? So I received my 20-week ultrasound and a 34-week ultrasound, I think is when I did it. So the 20-week ultrasound is pretty standard, whether you're seeing a midwife or a doctor. It's the anatomy scan. So they do that to measure the baby, make sure everything is okay, as far as how they're growing, make sure their heart looks okay, their brain and things like that. So that's pretty standard whether you're seeing a midwife or a doctor. The 34-week ultrasound, wait, backing up. Okay, so before I even get into that, let me clarify something. So when you are seeing a OBGYN doctor, your prenatal appointments will typically be with the same doctor. So you will see the same doctor every single time you go in for your appointments. When it's delivery day, unless you have a scheduled induction or a scheduled C-section, you will get whatever doctor is on call. So it might be your doctor, it might be a different doctor, you will just get whomever happens to be there. With midwives, every single time you have your appointment, they work as a team. So you will rotate through the midwife team, and you might see the same midwife every single time, you might see different ones. And then on delivery day, it's like just like doctors, you'll get whatever midwife is there. So that's kind of the difference between as far as your prenatal appointments go. So now going back to the 34-week ultrasound, one of the midwives I saw recommended it. The other midwife I saw was like, why would she recommend that? You don't need that. Everything is fine. You're measuring okay. Your heart rate is fine. Baby's heart rate is fine. Your blood pressure is fine. Why would she schedule that ultrasound? And then I went back the next time and saw that other doctor, and she was like, wait, why did she cancel the ultrasound? You need your ultrasound. And so it all kind of boils down to preference sometimes, but for the most part, they will not schedule anything that they don't feel like is absolutely necessary. There's also some kind of like little quirks and things that midwives will do and recommend that doctors wouldn't. So for example, my GBS test, which is a swab that happens around, I think 36 or 37 weeks, typically is performed by a doctor. So if you're going to see a doctor, it's kind of like a pelvic exam. They'll stick a little swab in your vagina, and it's not painful or anything like that, but typically a doctor would do that. So when I went in expecting my GBS test, I was expecting the midwife to do it for me, and instead she had me do it on myself, which was a little strange. I was not expecting that at all. So she left behind a little swab and a little jar, and she goes, hey, you stick this in your vagina, swish it around, and that's how you do it. And I was like, okay. So she left the room, and even my husband was like, do you want me to leave? Like, it was just kind of weird. And so then I had to like swab myself, which is really hard to do when you have a giant belly, when you have a 37-week big belly in front of you. So I had to like swab myself, and it was just kind of weird. But But that's something that I feel like a doctor probably wouldn't do, but a midwife, again, just kind of trusts the process. And I remember texting my sister after that, and I was like, is that normal for me to do that on myself? And she was like, no. And I was like, I don't even know if I did it correctly. And turns out I was actually GBS positive, so I know I did the swab correctly because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to identify that. Anyways, that was one thing. They also recommend weird things like eating dates. Like I got a list of things to naturally induce labor. And it was like, eat 6 dates a day, drink raspberry leaf tea, the midwife's brew, which is like castor oil mixed with peanut butter, and just kind of things that a doctor typically would never recommend or prescribe or things like that. Midwives do. So that was a little bit strange. So some of my friends and coworkers who have seen regular OBGYNs, not midwives, I would tell that to them and they were like, castor oil? Like, isn't that kind of dangerous? Or that's going to make you poop or things like that. So they, typically doctors don't recommend that kind of stuff. Also, midwives will spend a lot more time in your appointment with you. So they spend a lot more time teaching. Your appointments are a little bit longer. They want to talk to you. They want to know how you're doing. They check on your emotional health versus just your, physical medical health. They will typically, try to build a stronger relationship with you, and they kind of connect with you at a different level. Their educational background is typically, they go like the nursing route and then they add on an extra layer to become a midwife. And nurses are typically trained to have like bedside manner and emotional, things like that. Check on your mental state and do things like cleanup and, and so because they have that educational background, they just kind of carry that on into their midwifery. Is that a word? So they just spend more time with you, whereas doctors are typically like, they come in the room, they do what they need to do, and they leave. Things like that. Anytime I had any symptom for anything, they recommended rest and water. That was all. So my back hurts, rest and water. When my blood pressure just ever so slightly elevated, rest and water, lots of rest. Like that was kind of their ailment, is that the right word? For everything, like the natural medication, rest and water, which is kind of funny because anytime I talked I got to the point where it was humorous because I was like, oh, my feet are swelling, rest and water. Oh, I have a headache, rest and water. Like they would never like take Tylenol or bed rest or, anything like that. They were just like rest and water. Like that was just what they did. It was just kind of funny. But it's true. I mean, water and rest, it does work. And then finally, when it came to actual labor and delivery, so I went to the hospital. Again, I went to the same route as everybody else. I had a regular hospital room. I got my epidural. But once it was time for me to push and I was 10 centimeters dilated, the midwife stayed with me the whole time. They actually were in my labor and delivery room a lot, whereas doctors will kind of come and go and then they will only pop back in like right when you're about to deliver, like literally the last 5 minutes of delivery. So my sister is a labor and delivery nurse, and she said sometimes the doctors take so long that they don't even make it in time, and the nurses have to deliver your baby because the doctor is, doing something else. The midwife, she was in there a lot. She was in there for hours at a time. And then when I was fully dilated and it was time for me to push, granted, I pushed for almost an hour and a half. It was like an hour and 15 minutes. She was there the whole time. So from the moment she checked my cervix, discovered I was 10 centimeters dilated, to the moment that baby came out, she was there the whole time. So I pushed with her, not the nurse. The nurse was there also, but the midwife was there the whole time, which I thought was really cool. I actually kind of felt bad. I kept saying like, I feel so bad that you have to be here. I'm sorry it's taking so long. She was like, girl, no, this is what we do. Like, this is how we're supposed to do it. I think she did take like a 15-minute break to go to the bathroom, and she probably needed to eat. But other than that, like, she was there the whole time. So that was kind of cool. After delivery, the midwife stitched me up, so I did tear, but the midwife stitched me up just like a doctor would, which I wasn't expecting. For some reason, I thought that a OBGYN would have to do that, but nope, midwife did that too. And then my postnatal appointment was with a midwife as well. So she was able to check my, I was gonna say vagina, I guess that kind of is what she checked, to make sure I was healing correctly, make sure the stitches dissolved, all that stuff, and she also did my pap smear. So overall, I think the midwife route was really good. It worked for me. I loved the midwife. They were able to help me through slight high-risk things, like towards the end of my pregnancy. My blood pressure got really, really high, and I was able to stay with a midwife. Oh, good boy, that's what I was waiting for, was a big old burp. I was waiting for a big old burp. Sorry, I was getting a little bit distracted there. So, yeah, high blood pressure in pregnancy is something that can trigger a high-risk pregnancy. And so as my blood pressure was creeping up, I fully expected them to kind of refer me to a doctor. But no, I got to stay with the midwife. They also could have prescribed me with some medication to help with my high blood pressure. Luckily, I didn't get to that point, but they could have if I needed to get to that point. I was also, in my postnatal appointment, my midwife prescribed birth control, so they can write prescriptions as well, which is something I was a little bit unsure about. The only time, so I did notice, so the way that my, like the company that I do my prenatal and delivery care through has like an online portal that they load all of your test results and things like that. So I did notice that a doctor reviewed my ultrasound pictures. So I think the midwife runs certain things by the doctor because I saw doctor's notes left behind. So she wrote like, you know, baby's measuring normally, yada, 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 normal pregnancy, blah, blah, blah. Like the notes were left by the doctor. So I think they run certain things by the doctor. Also, when I was going to be induced for my labor, the midwife had also said like, hey, I talked to Dr. So-and-so about this. She recommends XYZ. So I think they work really closely together and they run certain things by the doctor instead of making the call on their own. Also, towards the very end of my delivery, baby's heart rate dropped really, really low. Now I'm telling, this is like the last two or three pushes, his heart rate dropped really low. And my midwife did call in a doctor to just observe and make sure everything was okay. Again, because I think they work together on certain things like that. Turns out we didn't need the doctor to be there. Everything was fine. But she did come in towards the end and then she left. And it was fine. Like she didn't help with anything other than that. So overall, I do think that if you're in a situation like me where you have no idea what the difference is, you call a provider and they're like, well, we have midwives available, check it out. I mean, at least try it, at least go and see what you think, see how you interact with them, see how you feel. Again, I don't feel like I missed out on anything. I feel like my prenatal experience was great. My labor and delivery experience was wonderful. I mean, I couldn't have recommended or thought anything different. And then my postnatal care has been phenomenal again. So yeah, that is my experience with the difference between a doctor and a midwife. If you have been in a situation like me and you have anything to add or anything that was maybe a little bit different with your experience with a midwife, then leave that in the comment section down below so we can kind of all talk about it together. But I hope that that kind of helps you in making your decision. And if you're pregnant, congrats. Soon enough, you're gonna have a little teeny baby just like this, sleeping with their arms up like this. All right, guys, I will talk to you next time.